Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name's David. I'm the host of a podcast called Tech Talks. It's been running for about 9 years, and I think the last 18 months has been almost continuously talking about AI, so it is no surprise to find ourselves doing so again. But I am excited that this talk is about identifying clear AI use cases that drive real business value, because I think that's the crux of what we're all looking for. And to help me do that, we've got two fabulous speakers, ThoughtWorks' Rebecca and Umbev's Tiago, two experts in the field. We've just been introduced by Ashley. We know a little bit, obviously, because the app tells us who you are. But why don't we start by asking, Rebecca, what's the relevance of AI in a professional setting to you?
Well, it's relevant in two completely different ways for us. Externally, we need to be prepared for the clients that we work with to deliver AI solutions to them. But we also need to apply it ourselves, to drink our own champagne, as we like to say, and figure out what are the use cases internally that will help us do our jobs better. So it's two completely different facets.
Absolutely, and Tiago, I assume you'd agree with that, but anything in particular that you kind of go, yeah, this is why it really matters to me in work right now?
Yeah, I would say during my biggest part of my career, AI was there in some way, and a vast array of business streams. Every time we have opportunities to work with AI, and especially now, working on a direct-to-consumer business, AI is closer to the heart of the organization, right? So it's fundamental for us to bring a better and a more personalized experience for our users.
Okay, so picking up then on one of the strands there, we're talking about personalized experiences. AI can do so much more for us right now, but it's not a new technology.
Oh.
And I love the fact that when we were preparing for this call, I think you said something along the lines of, we've had AI winters, Rebecca, which kind of makes it sound a bit like Game of Thrones or something
Yes.
epic in terms of its time scale. So why is it so important right now?
Well, in part, it's important to understand why the AI winters happened, because the hype was so enormous. They were talking back, in the 60s that we would have perfect machine translations in a decade. And I'm sure we've all seen lots of amusing translations, even within the last year. I think three things are different now, and they're all related. Moore's Law. Computers are just so much faster than they used to be. Memory is so much cheaper than it used to be. And between the Internet of Things and just the Internet in general, we have got so much data that we can make systems better. These systems get better the more data they have. And we have an enormous amount of data relative to what we had in the previous autumns of AI.
So I think it's interesting that you talk about vast amounts of data, possibilities. This technology does offer so much, and I think the talk, the framing of the talk to explore the vast potential and societal impact unlocked by AI. So if we're thinking about those possibilities, it gets very exciting. It feels like with AI we've been sold the art of possible before necessarily organizations are ready. Tiago, how concerned are you that we're trying to run before we can walk, especially when it comes to an enterprise setting?
Yeah, you are spot on. Like, AI is very cool. Everyone wants to talk about AI. Everyone wants to work with AI. But I'm a strong believer that you have to work on the foundations first, right? So you have to know the technology you are working so you can use the best tool for the correct problem. And of course, you have to try, learn, experiment, but at least you have to have guardrails like data privacy policies, human oversight. So it's very important to follow those trends, but you have to build the foundations so you can evolve in a consistent way, and in a way that you're going to win in the long run, right?
Tiago mentioned tools. How well understood is it at the board level which tool is the right tool to use?
It is not understood, and I think that's a significant problem. Particularly people who are not hardcore technologists. They work on kind of a stylized mental model of how tech works. And certain things are just supposed to work a certain way. Like you ask, you do a particular action and it gives you a particular answer. And if you do that same action again, you expect the same answer. It is a feature, not a bug, of these large language models that in fact that is not true. You will get different answers. And that just sort of blows the mind of people, particularly when they're trying to think about this from a risk perspective, is how do I qualify this risk? And it is becoming a real risk. There was a case in Canada. Air Canada had a customer service chatbot, and somebody made a request of the chatbot for a refund for bereavement. And the large language model created its own bereavement policy and told the customer that he could have his refund. And the courts held that Air Canada was liable for that because it was their system that came up and said, of course you can have a refund. And so these are the kinds of things that boards don't necessarily understand the risk profile, because it just does not fit their mental model of how technology works. Technology is supposed to behave itself, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
Where's the problem in an enterprise setting there, though? Because you said that the board doesn't understand, but I suppose the board sees the potential application and use from a commercial setting for a tool like that. But you talked about the risk-reward aspect. Is that more of a challenge with how digital leaders conduct their work or have historically conducted their work, and they're being asked to do something different?
Well, I do think the board has significant responsibility for oversight of risk, to know that, yes, risk mitigation efforts are in place. You're right, though. Further down the line is where you're going to be building the business case on whether or not this is a good idea or not. And that's certainly the responsibility of those digital leaders who are looking to see how AI can help solve a particular problem. But we have to give that education at that board level so they understand that this risk profile is a very different risk profile than what they've dealt with in the past. They worry about cybersecurity, and there are all kinds of board level discussions about cybersecurity. Having your chatbot suffer a jailbreak, so then start spewing out things it's not supposed to spew out. That is the same kind of category of risk, and the board needs to be aware of that.
Just to throw this in then, Tiago, Rebecca, I'd love both of your perspectives on this. The editorial team at Web Summit gave the moderators 3 additional questions to perhaps throw into talks. And you're mentioning there that AI might throw out hallucinations, might spew out something that's dangerous. What do you think, in a business setting, in an enterprise setting, the most dangerous thing is about AI today? Tiago.
Okay. Yeah, I think Rebecca already talked a little bit about that, but I would like to add something. I think it's about the responsibility of the decisions. Sometimes we are just creating new models, new things that gonna help or gonna take decisions, and I don't see the boards or everyone discussing about who is responsible for that decision. Like, is that the tech team? Is that the data team? Is that the business owner? Who's gonna be accountable for that? So I think this is one interesting point that makes me think a lot.
Do you have a view on where responsibility should lie within an organization?
I think it has to lie with the business leaders.
Yeah.
Which is why we as technologists need to make sure that they understand the consequences of the potential consequences of the different decisions. And I think it becomes more problematic given the fact that This isn't just a recommendation on an e-commerce site. These are, medical diagnoses and criminal justice and the areas that this is being applied to, and therefore the potential harms that can come to people when they get it wrong. We're even starting to hear discussions about how this technology is going to be applied in weapons. Well, there's only so much a technologist can anticipate given the inherent non-deterministic nature of the technology. Like I said, it's a feature, not a bug, that it behaves this way. It can't be creative if it can't stray off the path every once in a while. And so I do think it has to be more of a business level responsibility.
So we've spent a few minutes being cautionary about
Yes,
AI.
and I hate being a Debbie Downer. I really do.
So let's take this opportunity to not be that Debbie Downer, because the title of the session is about identifying clear user cases that drive business value. And again, weaving a tapestry of possibilities is how we're framing this. What positive user cases can you point to so that people here at Web Summit can go, aha, this is great, look at what it can deliver for business today?
Well, one of my favorite examples not only delivers for business, assuming you're in the pharmaceutical industry, but it also delivers for society. Because we have some of these large language models now that have been trained on DNA sequences and how the protein folds. And so this can be used for drug discovery by, rather than having to go through enormous either simulations or physical processes, you can identify potential drug candidates much more quickly because you have this model that will tell you this is what this thing actually looks like when it folds in 3 dimensions. And so if we could radically decrease the cost of getting new drugs to market, we can make it more financially viable to go after some of the diseases that are plaguing South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, India, where the research just doesn't go there. It goes into Western problems because that's where the money is in the healthcare market. So that's one that has both societal value but tremendous business value as well.
Yeah, and I think that's tremendously exciting. And
Oh, I love it.
yeah, absolutely. I'm Devon, and Tiago, you're working in Brazil. Rebecca there referenced perhaps how it might help in Latin America. What user cases would you point to? I suppose here, closer to home, where you kind of really see some positive value being driven.
Okay, I think just to bring a different perspective and to be even closer, I can bring some examples that we are using inside. For example, the personalization we just talked about, something that's bringing much value. Automation of repetitive tasks, and there's a good example that I like a lot is about code quality, because something that for us was very important, like we identified the problem, code quality was making us slower in some part of the business, then we could identify the process, clear process, where are our bottlenecks, and then we could try Gen AI in part of those processes, and just then we can have the results. So we could free up time from our team, like to be more efficient, to work on more complex tasks, and again, the most important, deliver a better product for our customers. So I like those practical examples.
And there's also a lot that can be done in supply chains. We understand a lot about how to make supply chains efficient, and for the most part, if one thing goes wrong, they can figure out how to reconfigure the supply chain. If you think back to the pandemic and the barge caught in the Suez Canal and ... you start to get these cascading failures in supply chains. And these systems can help ideate potential new configurations for things like supply chains. Now, do I know that's going to work? No. Do I think it's going to help? Absolutely. And when you think about multiple disruptions to the same supply chain, it takes a lot of human brain power to come up with a solution. None of the models really right now that they're using can handle multiple disruptions in the supply chain. And fixing supply chain problems has enormous business value.
It's interesting that you talk about something, I suppose, that's slightly more hidden from the view of the public there with supply chains. When we're talking about medtech, the impact on society is abundantly clear for everyone to see. You started at the top of the conversation by saying there's a slight difference between internal value and external value. And sorry, forgive me, I'm going slightly off piste here, but is it always understood when we're innovating and working quickly within organizations what the impact is of the technology that we're developing on society? And if it isn't, is that problematic?
No, it is not, and yes, it is problematic, and that's why you'll hear us talking a lot about responsible tech, because Mark Andreessen has this wonderful quote, which I'll have to paraphrase, which is basically technologists are very bad at predicting the consequences of their technology. Unfortunately, so is everybody else. We really don't understand often what the impact of our technology will be. Mark Zuckerberg did not set out to facilitate genocide. That wasn't part of his business plan, but people figured out how to do it. And he didn't anticipate that that was one possible outcome. So I definitely think that as an industry, we need to do a much better job of thinking not just about the people that we're solving the problem for, but everybody else, all of the other stakeholders, citizens, the environment, economic, all sorts of things. And so, yes, I do think it's a problem, and it's something that we are spending significant time trying to codify and come up with tools that will help people make their tech more responsible.
Yeah, I think just connecting what we said before, like if the executives doesn't know technology, they won't predict those problems. So I think this makes the responsibility from the tech team even higher to think, predict, and talk about those possible problems in the future.
Yes, because as I said before, as technologists, it's our job to help the people who are making the business decisions understand the consequences of their decision.
Perfect.
And they can't do that without us giving them the information.
Exactly.
Tiago, it stands to reason that we're very excited about this technology, but are we creating a bit of a bottleneck by being so keen to focus on AI? We're forgetting other technologies which could be better solutions.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I think there's no silver bullet, and this is true for any technology, and this is true for AI. For instance, sometimes, and I would say most of the times, a well-structured database with some basic calculations are going to deliver better results than a very complex AI model, right? Or a well-designed user interface can deliver more results than ultra-sophisticated hyper-personalization algorithm. They might not make the headlines, but they definitely deliver results.
We as an industry are far too enamored with silver bullets, and it's particularly problematic when the technology is so complex that it's difficult to understand, and so it's like, well, of course we'll use Gen AI for this, and it's like, why?
So look, if we take that why question, because it's probably quite a good place to end, and we're into the last couple of minutes, when people are thinking in this room about implementing AI, and they've asked the why, and it is the right solution, what would both of you recommend that they bear in mind, some key fundamentals to try and make sure that they do end up with real business value? Rebecca.
Accept the fact that we have to completely reset our minds, the way we think about problems, to use this technology. And so make sure you give yourself a chance to think more expansively about how you might use this technology, both to take advantage of its strengths and to protect yourself from their weaknesses.
Do you think people are too narrow in their thinking?
Yes. Based on what I've seen, they're just trying to tweak their processes, and I think they need to think bigger.
Tiago.
Yeah, just trying to add, I would say two things. First one, know the technology you are working, know the limitations, know the capabilities, and know the problem you are trying to solve, right? If you don't know the problem you're trying to solve, you are not going to deliver results. And yeah, I think those are the two main topics to have in mind to make it work in a way it's good for the business.
Well, look, thank you both very much. We're just about out of time. Thank you for letting me ask you some questions about this important topic, and thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.